All right, so what I wanted to talk to you about today is the early dysfunctional relationship with a parent or parents growing up and how that impacts your stress capacity when you're older. A lot of people don't realize this. You are doing a lot of things if you're exhausted and you're burnt out and you don't have the energy, you're crashing in the middle of the day, and you may have brain fog, you don't handle stressors very well, feel anxious, maybe some GI disturbances, not sleeping, and really just not doing well. And that is a stress response breakdown, whether you call it adrenal fatigue or not. But what I did want to explain is that there's a huge component there, which I had myself, and I work with a lot of people that have very commonly, and that's the early breakdown of relationships with a parent. And I'll explain it to you on a psychological level, but also on a physiological level and a stress response level. And really, what happens is our brains are developed from how much love a parent gives a child. And this has been researched with orphans that grew up in a place where there's orphans. Can't say the name for some reason. But what ultimately happens is if they're not loved and cared for, they fail to thrive, and that's just kind of how we're programmed. Is things that receive stimulation and utility and usefulness develop, and things that don't get a lot of stimulation and don't get a lot of utility or usefulness are not favorable. So they are less programmable, if you will, or they die at the wayside. Those are traits that don't help us survive. So the same is true for emotions. And if a parent is loving, if a parent is hands-on, if a parent is not hands-on or even hostile, that will impact the child's what they see and how that forms their brain. And as it relates to stress, that's the big connecting dots that I want to explain. As it relates to stress, it's shown that early stressful behaviors where there wasn't that sense and there's a sense of detachment is really the term that was used in studies, is detachment. But really the detachment is a less than favorable household, could be just stress in life and divorces and addictions and finances and just life, right? But ultimately, the growing child then has an impact on their brain, their limbic systems, their emotional centers, which are also responsible for interpretation of stressors and stress responses. And when you have a stress response that is heightened, there's an emotion there that was formed earlier, or at least enables or initiates the stress response a lot quicker. So those people tend to have more fatigue because for each given stress, they have more impact physiologically. Does that make sense? And that's all based on the emotional, in part, not 100%. But if you're focusing on a lot of other things like licorice root and bioidentical hormones and time restricted eating windows and starving yourself and not being happy and not seeing results, ask yourself the question: is that something that has impacted you? Because if it has, first and foremost comes down to the awareness, which I always say, it always comes down to the awareness that this has happened, that for each given stress that you experience, physiologically, you're going to have less capacity and less reserve to deal with that stressor. And if you combine that with other things already, it's no wonder that you're not fill in the blank. You're not awake, or you're not focused, or you're not handling stress, or you're not losing the weight, or you're not sleeping, or you're not balanced with your emotions, or you have your libido. Those are the big impactors. So now the second question would be, what could you do about it? Well, number one, we said being aware of it. Number two, modulating your behavior in terms of when the stressor does happen, and that I've said has to do with breathing. But it also comes down to, there does have to be some psychological work. And it doesn't mean you're laying on a couch and telling your story for hours and hours, but it means that you are working through those and you are either giving yourself permission to heal, whether it's words you need to say to yourself or words other people need to say to you, or things that you work through that make the healing happen in your body, so that when the stress response does happen the next time, and it will, it's not modulated incorrectly because of what you haven't been able to resolve as a younger person. Hopefully that made a lot of sense. So I look forward to continuing to support you in your recovery of your fatigue. And if you're looking for some help, just DM me and we can talk about getting you feeling better. Have an awesome